Okay, get ready to dive deep, because today we're exploring the fascinating world of Hebrew letters, but not just the basics. We're talking shapes, meanings, hidden connections to Kabbalah and tarot. Even the number 9 makes a surprise appearance.
It's true. And the best part is we're going beyond simple letter groupings. We're using your workbook to visually master these ancient symbols.
It's more like cracking a code than your typical language lesson. And speaking of the workbook, it's essential for avoiding those common mistakes beginners make, especially with similar-looking letters. It cleverly groups them into families based on how they're drawn.
Exactly. It's all about those visual connections. And there's no better place to start than with the very first family and the tiny but mighty letter that started it all. Yod.
Ah, the yod. Small but powerful, right? Kind of like that saying, big things come in small packages.
Precisely. Now, this Yod isn't just any letter. It's considered the parent of all Hebrew letters, the foundational spark of creation itself.
Hold on, the parent. How can one tiny letter be the source of all the others?
It's all about the shape. Remember, the workbook emphasizes the visual. You'll see that Yod, along with Zayn and Teth, make up that first family because they all share that basic Yod shape at the top. Think of it like a family resemblance, but in written form.
So Zayn and Teth, they both have that yod top. But what makes them unique, it's like they're each drawing energy from that initial spark, but expressing it in their own way.
That's a great way to put it. We'll explore those individual characteristics in a bit, but you've hit on a crucial point. Subtle differences in form point to deeper meanings.
I'm already seeing how this visual approach works, but before we get ahead of ourselves, let's go back to that powerful parent letter, yod. The workbook says it's connected to the hand of God and the spark of creation itself. That's a lot for one little letter.
A lot of responsibility for something so small. But even the most complex creations, like, say, an entire universe, have to start somewhere. It's that initial spark of energy that the Yod embodies. Deceptively simple, yet incredibly powerful.
It reminds me of that quote from the Zohar, a key text in Kabbalah that says, "He who feels small is big." That tiny yod definitely embodies that paradox.
Exactly. It speaks to the idea that humility and hidden potential can be powerful forces. Yod reminds us to never underestimate the power of the seemingly insignificant.
Okay, so we've got Yod, the parent, the spark of creation. What about its kids, Zayn and Teth? What stories do their shapes tell?
Well, we talked about how they both have that Yod top, but their, shall we say, bodies are formed quite differently. Zayn's interesting. It begins with a line that cuts right down the middle of the Yod, while Teth has this full, rounded base.
Interesting. It's like they each took that Yod energy in a new direction. I'm excited to see where this visual journey takes us next.
It's like they each took that initial spark, that Yod energy, and kind of ran with it in their own way.
And speaking of new directions, that leads us perfectly to our next family of letters, the Vav family. Oh yeah, the Vav family. Now, if I remember correctly, these letters take a slightly different visual journey from the Yod, right? Instead of branching out, they sort of descend from its tip.
You got it. It's like taking that initial spark of creation, that Yod energy, and bringing it down to earth.
I like a descent from the divine, which makes me think about the Vav itself. Essentially an elongated Yod, right? So if the Yod is the spark, what's the story with the Vav's extended shape?
Now that's where it gets really interesting. The Vav represents that spark extending, creating a link between heaven and earth. In fact, the Zohar, that key text in Kabbalah, refers to the Vav as the letter of truth.
The letter of truth? Why truth specifically? Is it the straight, upright shape? Like visually, it just feels very honest and direct.
You're spot on with those visual cues. That uprightness is a big part of it. It suggests integrity, directness, a clear connection between intention and action.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But there's more to it than just that, right? The workbook mentions something about the Vav having a messianic link, a connection to the son of David.
Right, now we're getting into some deep stuff. It's a complex concept with deep roots in Jewish mysticism. The son of David is a messianic figure, and the Vav, with its connection to truth and its role as a bridge between realms, is seen as embodying some of those messianic qualities.
Whoa, that's a lot to unpack. We're seeing how these seemingly simple shapes hold layers and layers of meaning, and we haven't even gotten to the other letters in the Vav family yet. So what about Gimel, Lamed, Nun? What can you tell us about those?
Well, like we said, they all share that visual descent from the Yod's tip, but each one has its own unique character. Take Gimel, for instance. It's the one with that boxy base, almost as if it's being anchored or grounded, you know.
It's like taking that divine energy from the Vav and firmly planting it in the physical world. What about the other letters?
Well, then there's Lamed, which is always standing tall, stretching above the other letters. It's been described as a tower soaring in the air.
Oh, I love that imagery. A tower soaring in the air, it just screams ambition, aspiration, a striving for something higher.
Exactly. And then we have none, which in contrast to the straight lines of Vav and Lambd, is all about curves and receptivity. The workbook describes it as a vessel, open and waiting to be filled.
I can see it. It's amazing how each of these letters is like a different expression of that initial yod spark, taking on new forms and meanings as we move through the family. Speaking of which, what about those final forms, Sadi final and Nun final? They look like stretched out versions of their regular counterparts.
You've got a sharp eye. They do have that elongated quality, extending below the line as if they're breaking free from the typical structure. And in a way, they are. These final forms represent a kind of completion, a final stage of development.
So we've got sparks, descents, towers, vessels, and a sense of completion. It's amazing how these letters tell a story, a visual narrative of creation and transformation.
And we're just getting started.
From sparks to descents to, well, now we're talking about letters that stretch horizontally, like they're reaching out, trying to embrace a wider perspective or something.
That's a great way to put it. And it's exactly what the Resh family represents, this broadening of horizons, a connection to something bigger than just ourselves.
I'm ready to expand my horizons. So tell me, what's so special about Resh itself?
Resh, it's all about the head. And not just in the physical sense, it's linked to collective intelligence. Think, the combined wisdom of generations past.
So when I'm drawing Resh, I should imagine I'm like tapping into some universal library.
Downloading knowledge from the entire human experience.
Exactly. It's a powerful concept. And this whole emphasis on interconnectedness, it's a recurring theme throughout the Resh family, actually.
Speaking of interconnectedness, let's talk about Kaf. I always thought it looked like a bowl, but the workbook says it's shaped like a hand.
It is. An open hand, which makes sense when you think about it. Palm, grasping.
Yeah.
It's about both giving and receiving. And yeah, it's easy to mix up with Beth, the house, because of that similar base. But a house, it offers shelter and open hand. It's all about connection and exchange. The nuances are amazing. Honestly, this workbook is changing how I see the alphabet. Who knew? What else is hidden in the Resh family?
Well, there's Pe, the mouth. Visually, it's pretty different from the other letters in this family. What's interesting is how it relates to Ayin, the eye, which we talked about earlier.
Ooh, the senses and symbolism. Are they opposites, complements, or something totally different?
Now, there's a question worth pondering. This deep dive, it's not just about giving you the answers. It's about giving you the tools to ask your own questions. Explore these symbols at a deeper level.
So true. But before we move on completely, can't forget those other families, even just a quick glimpse. Daleth and Aleph, those two have always seemed more, I don't know, complex.
They do have more intricate forms, yeah. Daleth, with that long roofline, that's often seen as a metaphor for charity, offering shelter, protection.
The shape itself is about giving, a reminder of how we should act towards each other.
Right. And then there's Aleph. Now, Aleph's unique. It's actually constructed from other letters, which reflects, well, a union of different realities, like different dimensions of existence even.
Whoa, a microcosm of the whole alphabet, reflecting that bigger truth about how everything's connected.
Beautifully put. Which brings us back to that idea of a journey. We've got letters as sparks, vessels, towers, reaching for something higher, expressions of interconnectedness, even charity. It's pretty remarkable when you think about it.
It is. But before we wrap up, we have to talk about those final forms. You know, the ones the workbook says hold the secret of redemption. What's the deal with those?
Visually, they're pretty striking. These are the letters that change their form at the end of a word, and a lot of times they have this elongated look extending below the line, like they're breaking free.
They do. And each one has a counterpart in the regular alphabet, so it's almost like transformed versions, like they went through some kind of growth, some evolution.
Now that's an interesting thought. And it brings us right back to that tiny but mighty yod. If we think of yod as the initial spark, the pure potential, then maybe these final forms, they're the culmination, the fulfillment of that potential.
It's like the whole alphabet is this journey of transformation from that initial spark of creation all the way to this state of completion. And every single letter, it's a stepping stone along the way, reflecting different parts of that journey.
It really makes you see things differently, doesn't it? The alphabet isn't just shapes. It's a map of the human experience, a reflection of our own journeys of growth and change.
This whole deep dive has totally changed how I see Hebrew letters. They're not just for language anymore. They're these vessels of meaning, ancient wisdom, and honestly profound truths about ourselves and the universe.
That's the power of symbols. They unlock hidden depths, connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
It makes you think, though, if each letter represents a stage in our own journeys, what does that say about the paths we're each on? What do these shapes reveal about our stories, about how we each express that yod spark in our own unique way?
That's a great question, and one that deserves a lot more exploration. But maybe for now we can just sit with that sense of wonder, knowing that even the simplest symbols hold the keys to incredible truths.